Chapter 2. 31 months earlier, Friday, January 10th, 1975. Odin Salisbury arrived 10 minutes early for his 3 o'clock appointment. That was characteristic of him. H. Leonard Dawson, president and principal stockholder of FutureX International, did not at once welcome Salisbury into his office. In fact, Dawson kept him waiting until 3:15. That was characteristic of him. He never allowed his associates to forget that his time was inestimably more valuable than theirs. When Dawson's secretary finally ushered Salisbury into the great man's chambers, it was as if she was showing him to the altar in a hushed cathedral. Her attitude was reverent. The out office had music, but the in office had pure silence. The room was sparsely furnished. A deep blue carpet, 2 somber oil paintings on the white walls, 2 chairs on the side of the desk, 1 chair on the other side of it, a coffee table, rich blue velvet drapes drawn back from 700 square feet of lightly tinted glass that overlooked Midtown Manhattan. The secretary bowed almost like an altar boy recreating from the sanctuary. "How are you, Ogden?" He reached out to shake hands. "Fine, just fine, Leonard." Dawson's hand was hard and dry. Salisbury was damp. "How's Miriam?" He noticed Salisbury's hesitation. "Not ill?" "We were divorced," Salisbury said. "I'm sorry to hear that." Was there a trace of disapproval in Dawson's voice? Salisbury wondered. "And why the hell should I care if there is?" "When did you split up?" Dawson asked. 25 years ago, Leonard." Salisbury felt as if he had ought to use the other man's last name rather than his first, but he was determined not to be intimidated by Dawson as he had been when they were both young men. "It has been a long time since we've talked," Dawson said. "That's a shame. We had so many great times together." They had been fraternity brothers at Harvard and casual friends a few years after they left university. Salisbury could not remember a single great time they might have shared. Indeed, he always thought of the name H. Leonard Dawson as a synonym for both prudery and boredom. "Have you remarried?" Dawson asked. "No." Dawson found marriage is essential to an ordered life. It gives a man stability. "You're right," Salisbury said, although he didn't believe it. "I've been the worse for bachelorhood." Dawson had always made him uneasy. Today was no exception. He felt ill at ease, partly because they were so different from each other. Dawson was 6'2", broad in the shoulders, narrow at his hips, athletic. Salisbury was 5'9", slope-shouldered, and 20 pounds overweight. Dawson had thick greying hair, a deep tan, clear black eyes, and matinee idol features, whereas Salisbury was pale with receding hair and myopic brown eyes that required thick glasses. They were both 54. Of the two, Dawson had weathered the years far better. Then again, Salisbury thought, he began with better looks than I. With better looks, more advantages, more money. If Dawson radiated authority, Salisbury radiated civility. In the laboratory of their own familiar turf, Ogden was as impressive as Dawson. They were not in the laboratory now, however, and he felt out of place, out of his class, inferior. "How is Mrs. Dawson?" The other man smiled broadly. "Wonderful, just wonderful. I've made thousands of good decisions in my life, Ogden, but she was the best of them." His voice grew deeper and more solemn. It was almost theoretical in effect. "She's a good, God-fearing, church-loving woman." "You're still a Bible thumper," Salisbury thought. He suspected that this might help him achieve what he had come here to do. They stared at each other, unable to think of any more small talk. "Sit down," Dawson said. He went behind the desk while Salisbury settled in front of him. The 4 feet of polished oak between them further established Dawson's dominance. Sitting stiffly, briefcase on his knees, Salisbury looked like the corporate equivalent of a lapdog. He knew he should relax, that it was dangerous to let Dawson see how easily he could be intimidated. Nevertheless, knowing this, he could only pretend relaxation by folding his hand up atop his briefcase. "This letter," Dawson looked at the paper on his blotter. Salisbury had written this letter and knew it by heart. "Dear Leonard, since we left Harvard, you made more money than I have. However, I haven't wasted my life. After decades of study and experimentation, I have nearly perfected a process that is priceless. The proceeds in a single year could exceed your accumulated wealth. I am entirely serious. Could I have an appointment at your convenience? You won't regret having given it to me. Make the appointment for Robert Stanley, a subterfuge to keep my name out of your date book. As you can see from the letterhead on this stationery, I direct operations at the main Biochem Research Lab. Laboratory for Creative Development Associates, a subsidiary of Futurix International. If you know the nature of CDA's business, you understand the need for circumspection. As ever, Ogden Salisbury. He had expected to give a quick response with a letter, and his expectation had been met. At Harvard, Leonard had been guided by two shining principles, money and God. Salisbury had supposed, and rightly, that Dawson hadn't changed. The letter was mailed on Tuesday. Late Wednesday, Dawson's secretary called to make the appointment. I don't ordinarily sign for registered letters, Dawson said sternly. I accepted only because your name was on it. After I read it, I very nearly threw it in the trash. Salisbury winced. Had it been from anyone else, I would have thrown it away. But at Harvard, you were no braggart. Have you ever stated your case? No. You've discovered something you think is worth millions. Yes, and more. His mouth was dry. Dawson took a manila folder from the center desk drawer. Creative Development Associates, we bought that company several years ago. You were with it when we made the acquisition. Yes, Sir Leonard. As if he had not noticed Salisbury's slip of the tongue, Dawson said, CDAs produces computer programs for universities and government bureaus involved in sociology and psychological studies. He didn't bother to page through the report. He seemed to have memorized that CDA also does research for government and industry. It operates 7 laboratories that are examining the biological, chemical, and biochemical causes of certain sociological and psychological phenomena. You're in charge of the Broca Institute in Connecticut, he frowned. The entire Connecticut facility is devoted to top secret work for the Defense Department. His black eyes were exceptionally sharp and clear, so secret, in fact, that even I couldn't find out what you're doing up there. Just that's in the general field of behavior modification. Clearing his throat nervously, Salisbury wondered if Dawson was broad-minded enough to grasp the value of what he was about to be told. Are you familiar with the term subliminal perception? It has to do with the subconscious mind. That's right. As far as it goes, I'm afraid I'm going to sound rather pedantic, but a lecture is in order. Dawson leaned back as Salisbury leaned forward, by all means extracting 2 8x10 photographs from the briefcase. Salisbury said, do you see any difference between photo A and photo B? Dawson examined them closely. They were black and white pictures of Salisbury's face. They're identical. On the surface, yes. They're prints of the same photos. What's the point? I'll explain later. Hold on to them for now. Dawson stared suspiciously at the pictures. Was this some sort of game? He didn't like games. They were a waste of time. While you were playing games, you could just as easily be earning money. The human mind, Salisbury said, has 2 primary monitors for data input, the conscious and the subconscious. My church recognizes the subconscious, Dawson said affably. Not all churches will admit it exists, and are able to see the point of that. Salisbury ignored it. These monitors observe and store 2 different sets of data. In a manner of speaking, the conscious mind is aware only of what happens in its direct line of sight, while the subconscious has peripheral vision. These 2 halves of the mind operate independent of each other and often in opposition to each other. Only in the abnormal mind, Dawson said. No, in everyone's mind, yours and mine included. Disturbed that anyone should think his mind performed in any state other than perfect harmony with itself, Dawson started to speak. For example, Salisbury says quickly, a man is sitting at a bar. A beautiful woman takes the stool next to his with conscious intent to try to seduce her. At the same time, however, without being consciously aware of it, he may be terrified of sexual involvement. He may be afraid of rejection, failure, or impotency. With his conscious mind, he performs as society expects him to perform in the company of a sexy woman, but his subconscious works effectively against his conscious. Therefore, he alienates the woman. He talks too loudly and brashly. Although he's ordinary and interesting fellow, he bores her with stock market reports. He spills a drink on her. Then that behavior is a product of the subconscious fear. His outer mind says go, even his inner mind shouts stop. Dawson's expression was sour. He didn't appreciate the nature of the example. Nevertheless, he said, go on. The subconscious is the dominant mind. The conscious sleeps, but the subconscious never does. The conscious has no access to the data in the subconscious, but the subconscious knows everything that transpires in the conscious mind. The conscious is essentially nothing more than a computer, while the subconscious is the computer programmer. The data stored in the different halves of the minds are collected in the same way. through the 5 known senses, but the subconscious sees, hears, smells, tastes, and feels far more than does the other mind. It apprehends everything that passes too quickly or too subtly to impress the conscious mind. For our purpose, in fact, that is the definition of subliminal: anything that happens too quickly or too subtly to make an impression on the conscious mind. More than 90% of the stimuli that we observe through our 5 senses is subliminal import. 90%, Dawson said. You mean I see, feel, smell, taste, and hear 10 times more than I think I do? An example? Salisbury had one ready. The human eye fixates on objects at least 100,000 times a day. Our fixation lasts from a fraction of a second to a third of a minute. However, if you tried to list the 100,000 things you had looked at today, you wouldn't be able to recall more than a few hundred of them. The rest of those stimuli were observed by and stored in the subconscious, as were the addition to 2 million stimuli reported to the brain by the other 4 senses. Closing his eyes as if to block out all the sights he wasn't aware of seeing, Dawson said, "You've made 3 points." He ticked them off in his manicured fingers. 1, the subconscious is the dominant half of the mind. 2, we don't know what our subconscious minds have observed and remembered. We can't recall that data at will. 3, subliminal perception is nothing strange or occult. It is an integral part of our lives, perhaps a major part of our lives. And you've discovered a commercial use for subliminal perception. Salisbury's hand was shaking. It was close to the core of his proposition, and he didn't know whether Dawson would be fascinated or outraged by it. For 2 decades, advertisers of consumer products have been able to reach the subconscious mind of potential customers by the use of subliminal perception. The ad agencies refer to these techniques by several other names: subliminal perception, reception, threshold regulation, unconscious perception, subception. Are you aware of this? Have you heard of this? Still invariably relaxed, Dawson said, there are several experiments conducted in movie theaters 15, maybe 20 years ago. I remember reading about them in the newspapers. Salisbury nodded rapidly. Yes, the first was in 1957. During an ordinary showing of some film, a special message was superimposed on the screen. You are thirsty, or something of the sort. It was flashed off and on so fast that no one realized it was there. After it had been flashed 1,000 times, nearly everyone in the theatre went to the lobby and bought soft drinks. In those first crude experiments, which were carefully regulated by motivation researchers, subliminal messages had been delivered to the audience with a tachyscope, a machine presented by a New Orleans company, Precon Processing Equipment Corporation. In October of 1962, the tachyscope was a standard film projector with a high-speed shutter. It could flash a message 12 times a minute at 1/3000th of a second. The image appeared on the screen for too short time to be perceived by the conscious mind, but the subconscious was fully aware of it. During a 6-week test of the tachyscope, 45,000 theatre goers were subjected to 2 methods: drink Coca-Cola and hungry, eat popcorn. The results of these experiments left no doubt about the effectiveness of subliminal advertisement. Popcorn sales rose 60% and Coca-Cola sales rose nearly 20%. The subliminals apparently had influenced people to buy these products even though they were not hungry or thirsty. You see, Salisbury said, the subconscious mind believes everything it is told, even though it constructs behavioral sets based on the information it receives. And although those set guides the conscious mind, it can't distinguish between truth and falsehood. The behavior that it programs into the conscious mind is often based on misconceptions, but if that were correct, would have behave irrationally. And we all do, Salisbury said, in one way or another. Don't forget, the subconscious doesn't always construct programs based on wrong-headed ideas, just sometimes. This explains why intelligent men, paragons of reason in most things, harbour at least a few irrational attitudes, like your religious fanaticisms, he thought. He said radical and religious bigotry, for instance, xenophobia, claustrophobia, agoraphobia. If a man can be made to analyse one of these fears on a subconscious level, he'll reject it. But the conscious resists analysis. Meanwhile, the inner half of the mind continues to misguide the outer half. These messages on the movie screen, the conscious mind wasn't aware of them, therefore it couldn't reject them. Salisbury sighed. Yes, that's the essence of it. The subconscious saw the messages and caused the outer mind to act on them. Dawson was growing more interested by the minute. But why did the subliminal sell more popcorn than soda? The first message, drink Coca-Cola, was a declarative sentence. Salisbury said, a direct order. Sometimes the subconscious obeys an order that delivered subliminally, and sometimes it doesn't. Why is that? Salisbury shrugged, we don't know, but you see, the second subliminal was not entirely a direct order, it was more sophisticated. It began with the question, hungry? The question was designed to cause anxiety in the subconscious. It helped to generate a need. It established a motivational equation. The need, the anxiety, is on the left side of the equal sign. To feel the right side, to balance the equation, the subconscious programs the conscious to buy the popcorn. On one side cancels out the other. The buying of the popcorn cancels out the anxiety. The method is similar to post-synoptic suggestion, but I've heard that a man can't be hypnotized and made to do something he finds morally unacceptable. In other words, if he isn't a killer by nature, he can't be made to kill while under hypnosis. That's not true, Salisbury said. Anyone can be made to do anything under hypnosis. The inner mind can be manipulated so easily. For example, if I hypnotize you and tell you to kill your wife, you wouldn't obey me? Of course I wouldn't, Dawson said indignantly. You love your wife, I certainly do. You have no reason to kill her. None whatsoever. Judging by Dawson's emphatic denial, Salisbury thought the man's subconscious must be brimming with repressed hostility towards his God-fearing, church-loving wife. He didn't dare say as much. Dawson would have denied it and might have tossed him out of the office. However, if he hypnotized you and told you that your wife was having an affair with your best friend and that she was plotting to kill you in order to inherit your estate, you would believe me, and I would not. Julia would not be capable of such a thing. Salisbury nodded patiently. Your conscious mind would reject my story. It can reason, but after I've hypnotized you, I'll be speaking to your subconscious, which can distinguish between lies and truth. Ah, I see. Your subconscious won't act on a direct order to kill because a direct order doesn't establish a motivational equation, but it will believe my warning that she intends to kill you. And so believing, it will construct a new behavioral set based on the lies, and it will program your conscious mind for murder. Picture the equation. Then on the left of the equal sign, there is anxiety generated by knowledge that your wife intends to do away with you. On the right side, to balance the equation, to banish anxiety, you need the death of your wife. If your subconscious was convinced that she was going to kill you in your sleep tonight, it would cause you to murder her before you ever went to bed. Why wouldn't I just go to the police? Smiling, more sure of himself than he had been when he entered the office, Salisbury said the hypnotist could guard against that by telling your subconscious that your wife would make it look like an accident, that she was so clever the police would never prove anything against her. Raising one hand, Dawson waved at the air as if he was shooting away flies. This is all very interesting, he said in a slightly bored tone of voice, but it seems academic to me. Ogden's self-confidence was fragile. He began to tremble again. Academic? Subliminal advertising has been outlawed. There were quite a to-do at the time. Oh yes, Salisbury said, relieved. There were hundreds of newspaper and magazines editorials. Newsdays called it the most alarming invention since the atomic bomb. The Sunday Review said that the subconscious mind was the most delicate apparatus in the universe, and that it must never be sullied or twisted to boost the sales of popcorn or anything else. In the late 1950s, when the experiment with the Tuckiscope were published, nearly everyone agreed that subliminal advertising was an invasion of privacy. Congressman James Wright of Texas sponsored a bill to outlaw any device, film, photograph or recording designed to advertise a product or indoctrinate the public by means of taking an impression on the subconscious mind. Other congressmen and senators drafted legislation to deal with the menace, but none of the bills got out of committee. No law was passed restricting or forbidding subliminal advertising. Dawson raised his eyebrows. Do politicians use it? Most of them don't understand the potential, and the advertising agencies would just as soon keep them ignorant. Every major agency in the US has a staff of media and behavioral scientists to develop subliminals for magazine and television ads. Virtually every consumer item produced by Futurex and its subsidiaries is sold with subliminal advertising. I don't believe it, Dawson said. I would know about it, not unless you wanted to know and made an effort to learn. 30 years ago, when you were starting out, this sort of thing didn't exist. By the time it came into use, you were no longer closely tied to the sales end of your business. You were more concerned with stock use issues, mergers, wheeling and dealing. In a conglomerate of this size, the president can't possibly pass approval on every ad for every product of every subsidiary. Leaning forward in his chair, I looked distance in his handsome face. Dawson said, but I find it rather repulsive. If you accept the fact that a man's mind can be programmed without his knowledge, you're rejecting the notion that every man is at all times captain of his fate. It scares hell out of people. For 2 decades, Americans have refused to face the unpleasant truth about subliminal advertising. Opinion polls indicate that of those who have heard of subliminal advertising, 90% are certain it has been outlawed. They have no facts to support this opinion, but they don't want to believe anything else. Furthermore, between 50 and 70% of those polled say they don't believe subliminals work. They're so revolted by the thought of being controlled and manipulated that they reject the possibility and possibly out of hand, rather than educate themselves about the actuality of subliminal advertising, rather than rise up and rage against it. They dismiss it as a fantasy, as science fiction. Dawson shifted uneasy in his chair. Finally, he got up, went to his huge windows, and stared out at Manhattan. Snow had begun to fall. There was very little light in the sky. Wind, like the voice of the city, moaned on the far side of the glass. Turning back to Salisbury, Dawson said, one of our subsidiaries is an ad agencies, Waring and Messner. You mean every time they make a television commercial, they build into it a series of subliminal flashes message with a tachyscope? The advertiser has to request subliminals, Salisbury said. The service costs extra, but to answer your question, no, the tachyscope is out of date. The science of subliminal behavior modification developed so rapidly that the tachyscope was obsolete soon after it was patented. By the mid-1960s, most subliminals in television commercials were implanted with rheostatic photography. Everyone has seen a rheostatic control for a lamp or overhead light by turning it on. One can make the light dimmer or brighter. The same principle can be used in motion picture photography. First, the commercial is shot and edited to 60 seconds in the conventional manner. This is the half of the advertising that registers with the conscious mind. Another minute of film containing the subliminal message is shot with minimal light intensity, with the rheostat turning all the way down. The result image is too dim to register with the conscious mind. When it is projected on a screen, the screen appears to be blank. However, the subconscious sees and absorbs it. These 2 films are projected simultaneously and printed on a third length of film. It is this composite version that is used in television. While the audience watches the commercial, the subconscious mind watches and obeys to one degree or another the subliminal directive. And that's only the basic technique, Salisbury said. The experiments are even more clever. Dawson paced. He wasn't nervous, he was just excited. He's beginning to see the value, Salisbury thought happily. I see how subliminals could be hidden in a piece of film that's full of motion, light and shadow, Dawson said. But magazine ads, that's a static medium, one image. No movement. How could a subliminal be concealed on one page? Pointing to the photographs he had given Dawson earlier, Salisbury said, for the picture I kept my face expressionless. 2 copies were made from the same negative. Copy A was printed over a vague image of the word anger, and B was printed over the word joy. Comparing the photos, Dawson said, I don't see either word. I'd be displeased if you did. They aren't meant to be seen. What was the purpose? 100 students at Columbia were given photos A and asked to identify the emotion expressed by the face. 10 students had no opinion. 8 said displeasure and 82 said anger. A different group studied photo B. A expressed no opinion. 21 said happiness and 71 said joy. I see, Dawson said thoughtfully. Salisbury said, but they're as crude as the tachyscope. Let me show you some sophisticated subliminal ads. He plucked a sheet of paper from his briefcase. It was from the Time magazine. He put the page on Dawson's blotter. It's an ad for Gilby's Gin, Dawson said. At a glance, it was a simple liquor advertisement. A 5-word headline stood at the top of the page. Break out the frosty bottle. The only other copy was towards the lower right-hand corner. And keep your tonics dry. The accompanying illustration held 3 times. The most prominent of these was a bottle of gin which glistened with water droplets and frost. The cap of the bottle lay at the bottom of the page. Beside the bottle was a tall glass filled with ice cubes, a lime slice, a swizzle stick, and presumably gin. The background was green, cool, pleasant. The message intended for the conscious mind was clear. This gin is refreshing and offers an escape from everyday care. What the page had to say to the subconscious mind was far too interesting. Salisbury explained that most of the subliminal content was buried beneath the threshold of conscious recognition, but that some of it could have been analysed, although only with an open mind and perseverance. The subliminal that the conscious could most easily comprehend was hidden in the ice cubes. There were 4 ice cubes, stacked one atop the other. The second cube from the top and the lime slice formed a vague letter S, which the conscious mind could see when prompted. The third cube held a very evident letter E in the area of light and shadow that comprised the cube itself. The fourth chunk of ice contained the subtle but unmistakable outline, the letter X, SEX. Salisbury had come around behind Dawson's desk and had carefully traced these 3 letters with his 4 fingers. Do you see it? Scowl and Dawson said, I saw the E immediately, and the other 2 without much trouble, but I'm finding it hard to believe they were put there on purpose. It could be an accident or shading. Ice cubes usually don't photograph well, Salisbury said. When you see them in an advertisement, they're always being drawn by an artist. In fact, this entire day had been painted over a photograph, but there's more than the word in the ice. Squinting the page, Dawson said, what else? The bottle and glass are on a reflective surface. Salisbury circled the area of the reflection that dealt with the bottle and the cap. Without stretching your imagination too far, can you see that the reflection of the bottle is divided in 2, forming what might be taken to be a pair of legs? Do you see also that the reflected bottle cap resembles a penis thrust out from between those legs? Dawson bristled. I can see it, he said coldly, too interested in his own lecture to notice Dawson's uneasiness. Salisbury said, of course, the melted ice on the bottle cap could be semen. That image was never meant to be entirely subliminal. The conscious mind might recognize the intent here, but it would not recognize the reflection in the table unless it was guided to the recognition. He pointed to another spot on the page. Would it be going too far to say these shadows between the reflection of the bottle and the glass form vaginal lips, and that the drop of water on the table is positioned on the shadows precisely where the clitoris could be on a vagina? When he perceived the subliminal sex organs in its lips parted, Dawson blushed. I see it, or I think I do. Salisbury reached in his briefcase. I've got other examples. One of them was a 2-page subscription solicitation that had appeared shortly before Christmas several years before in Playboy. On the right-hand side, Playmate Liv Linden, a busty blonde, knelt on white carpet. On the other left page stood an enormous walnut wreath. She was tying a red bow to the top of the wreath. In one test, Salisbury explained 100 subjects spent an hour studying 200 advertisements, including this one. When the hour ended, they were asked to list the first 10 of these items that they could remember. 85% listed the Playboy ad in describing it all, but 2 subjects mentioned the wreath. Only 5 of them mentioned the girl. When questioned further, they had trouble recalling if she was blonde, brunette, or redhead. They remarked that her breasts weren't covered, but they couldn't say for sure whether she was wearing a hat or was clothed from the waist down. And she had no hat and was nude. None of them had trouble describing the wreath, for it was there that the subconscious had been riveted. Do you see why? Salisbury asked. That's not a walnut in that walnut wreath. It's composed of subjects that resemble the heads of penises and vaginal slits. Unable to speak, Dawson leafed through the other advertisements without asking Salisbury to explain them. Finally, he said, Camel cigarettes, Seagram, Sprite, Bacardi rum. Some of the most prominent companies in the country are using subliminals to sell their products. Why shouldn't they? It's legal. If the competition uses them, what choice does even the most moral uplifted company really have? Everyone has to stay competitive. In short, there are no individual villains. The whole system is the villain. Dawson returned to his executive chair, his face a book of his thoughts. One could read that he disliked and talked about the system, and that he was nonetheless shocked by what he had been shown. He was also trying to see how he could make a profit from it. He operated with the conviction that God wanted him to sit in an executive chair at the pinnacle of a billion-dollar corporation, and he was certain the Lord would help him to see that although subliminal advertising had a cheap and possibly immoral side to it, there was also an aspect of it that could aid him in his divine mission. As he saw it, his mission was to pile up profits for the Lord. While he and Julia were dead, the Dawsons' holdings wouldn't belong to the church. Salisbury returned to his seat in front of the desk. The litter of magazines, pages on the blotter, and bare oak seemed like a collection of pornography. He felt as if he had been trying to titillate Dawson. Irrationally, he was embarrassed. "You've shown me that a great deal of creative effort and money goes into subliminal commercials and ads," Dawson said. "Evidently, there's a general held theory that subconscious sexual stimulation sells goods, but does it enough to be worth the expense?" "Unquestionably. Psychological studies have proved that most Americans react to sexual stimuli with subconscious anxiety and tension. So if the subliminal half of a television commercial for XYZ soda shows a couple having intercourse, the viewer subconsciously starts bubbling with anxiety, and that establishes a motivation equation. On the left-hand side of the equal sign, there's anxiety and tension. To complete the equation and cancel out these bad feelings, the viewer buys a product, a bottle or a case of XYZ. The equation is finished. The blackboard wiped clean. Dawson was surprised. Then he doesn't buy the product because he believes it will give him a better sex life? Just the opposite, Salisbury said. He buys it to escape from sex. The ad fills him with desire on a subconscious level, and by buying that product, he is able to satisfy the desire without risking rejection, impotent simulation, or some other unsatisfactory experience with a woman. Or if the viewer is a woman, she buys the product to satisfy desire and thus avoids an unhappy affair with a man. For both men and women, the desire is well relieved if the product has an oral aspect, like food or soda or cigarettes, Dawson said. Could that explain why so many people have trouble giving up cigarettes? Nicotine is addictive, Salisbury said, but there's no question that subliminals in cigarettes reinforce the habits in most people. Scratching his square chin, Dawson said, "If these are so effective, why don't I smoke? I've seen the ads before." "The sign hasn't been perfected yet," Salisbury said. "If you think smoking is a disgusting habit, if you have decided never to smoke, subliminals can't change your mind. On the other hand, if you're young, just entering the cigarette market and have no real opinions about the habit, subliminals can influence you to pick it up. Or if you were once a heavy smoker but kicked the habit, subliminals can persuade you to resume smoking. Subliminals can also affect who have no strong brand preference. For example, if you don't drink gin or don't like to drink at all, subliminals in the Gilby's ad won't make you run out to the liquor store if you do drink, and if you do like gin, and if you don't care what brand of gin you drink. These ads could establish a brand preference for you." They work, Leonard. Subliminal sells hundreds of millions of dollars worth of goods every year, a substantial percentage of which the public might never buy if it were not subliminal manipulated. Dawson said, "You've been working on subliminal perception up there in Connected for the last 10 years. "Yes, perfecting the science, that's correct. The Pentagon sees a weapon in it, definitely. Don't you see it?" Quietly, reverberantly, Dawson said, "If you've perfected the science, you're talking about total mind control, not just behavior modification, but absolute iron-like control." For a moment, none of them could speak. "Whatever you've discovered," Dawson said, "you apparently want to keep it from the Defense Department. They might call that treason." "I don't care what they call it," Salisbury said sharply. "With your money and my knowledge, we don't need the Defense Department or anyone else. We're more powerful than all the world's governments combined." Dawson couldn't conceal his excitement. "What is it? What have you got?" Sarah went to the window and watched the snow spiraling down on the city. He felt as if he had taken hold of a live wire. A current buzzed through him, shaking with it, almost able to imagine that the snowflakes were sparks exploding from him. Feeling himself to be in the vortex of a godlike power, he told Dawson what he found and what Dawson could play in his scenario of conquest. Half an hour later, when Ogden finished, Dawson, who had never before been humble anywhere but in church, said, "Dear God." He stared at Salisbury as a devout Catholic might have gazed upon the vision at Fatima. "Ogden, the two of us are going to inherit the earth." His face was suddenly split by an utterly humorless smile. Thanks for listening.